Hi there, and welcome to I'll Knit If I Want To. I'm Andrea Mowry of Andrea Renee Knits, and this is a little weekly podcast. Sorry about that. I just realized that I read y'all's questions off of my iPad, and I just realized my headphones were trying to connect to that instead of that. But anyways, this is a little weekly podcast where I try my best to answer some of your questions, mostly about knitting, but sometimes we dip into some other fun things like spinning or sewing or life. Today is actually day 2 of the DRK Spring Hat Knit Along Challenge. So if you have not participated before and you're like, what are you talking about? Every spring and fall, I host a long weekend knit along challenge where basically we take like 4 to 5 days to try our best to cast on a hat in the spring, socks in the fall, and see if we can finish it by the end of the weekend, which really I give you to like Monday at midnight. So this is the 6th year we've done it, and I thought it would be fun to share like how this all came about, and then we'll jump into some questions. So basically, a little over 6 years ago, I designed the Harlow hat. And this is my version of the perfect brioche hat. I have knit so many of these. I actually now even have a worsted weight version that I was just wearing, I think, last week. And it is a reversible 2-color brioche hat that I really designed in the hopes that it would be a great way for people wanting to learn brioche to be able to do that. So the pattern includes links to a bunch of my brioche tutorials, which I show. I have videos that are specifically for English style knitting and brioche videos that are specifically for continental style knitting to kind of cover those 2 styles of knitting. Please excuse me, you can probably hear I am very congested right now. I don't know if it's allergies or a little cold, but getting through it. But I sound a little nasally, even more so than my typical Michigander accent. But anyways, so the Harlow hat is what kicked it all off. So I ended up releasing this pattern shortly before a long holiday weekend here in the States, and it just struck me, how fun would it be if we all tried to knit this weekend? Like, can we do it? And so it was very on a whim, not planned, not organized, like, let's just do it. And it was so much fun. So I decided to do it again in the fall with socks. And the next year I was like, all right, let's do this again, and let's see if every year we can't try to learn something new. So first year was brioche with the Harlow hat. The next year was the shift along hat. And this is mosaic knitting. So we focused on mosaic knitting the next year. You could also knit the tincture hat that year. I let it be either. I gave some options. So tincture was also a part of that one. And the next year I thought, okay, let's do cables. And for those who wanted an extra challenge, it was cabling without a cable needle. So we did my minted hat, which is this sweet little cabled hat. This one is knit in a single strand of Pishkin from Farmer's Daughter Fibers, where this one is actually 2 strands of yarn held together. It's Julie Asselin's Journey with Farmer's Daughter Fibers Oh Dang. So this one has that Surrey alpaca in it, and ooh, is it delightful. Oh my gosh, I want a whole sweater out of this. I'm gonna just set that aside because I think that might have just been a little moment of inspiration. I'm like, oh, that's so nice. Okay. From there, we did standard color work the next year. So we did the flicker and flame hats. This was a fun one because I sized these so that you could do it either in worsted or sport weight. And they were sized for the whole family. So these hat patterns come in like 5 sizes. So that was kind of fun too. People could jump in with whichever they preferred. This hat's a little bit slouchier. This is the sport weight one. So they're a little different from each other. They're not perfect copies of each other. And this one fits more like your traditional toque or beanie. And then last year we did half fisherman's rib. And this is the Straya hat. which is a direct spin-off of my Straya cardigan, which was for the Insta Friends knit along. Can you tell I love a knit along? I met one of my all-time best friends through a knit along, and so they hold a very special place in my heart. I am very shy. I'm not the most outgoing person. Tend to be a bit of a homebody. So knit alongs were such, when I made it this real life friendship through a knit along, I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. Like, we have this thing we connect on, and we went to meet each other in real life and have stayed friends ever since. So I love a knit along. But yeah, so this is a half fisherman's rib, little striped beanie, which brings us to this year. So this year I wanted to do my Old Port hat. So this is the Old Port hat. This is my original, which, y'all, so sad. You probably can't tell. This went through the washer and dryer. I used to run with this hat all the time, and I think it must have like gotten tangled up in my running shirt or something, and I didn't realize. So very sadly, this hat is felted. I can still squeeze it on my tiny little head, but you know, it's not what it once was. And I love this hat. Like, I have worn this, really, it's only second to Harlow as far as my most worn hat. I guess I really love a brioche hat. But I just loved this hat so much. So to tell you a few things that make this hat special, if I can get through this video without sneezing, I will be amazed. I've just been like, oh, sneeze city over here. Okay. So basically, I was running around our little bay here, and I walk or jog around it most days of the year. I love to watch the weather change. I love to see all the different birds we get in the different seasons, and the different wildflowers that come up, and it is just one of my happy places. But we can get a very blustery breeze out there. And so I was wearing one of my typical hats, and the wind, I have really sensitive ears. Does anyone else have this problem? My mom does, where we get like ear headaches in cold wind. It's very painful. So I was like, I need something more substantial around my ears. So I came up with this idea to do this brim liner, and I wanted it to be like a treat to myself. So I had been chatting with Casey from Port Fiber, which is my favorite little fiber shop here. Casey is one of my friends. They taught me how to spin, and they have this amazing project with Cashmere People Yarns, where this yarn, this is the one I'm going to be using for this weekend's knit along, is hand spun by women in very small villages outside of Tajikistan and Afghanistan. And they spin cashmere and cashgora yarns by hand. And they are paid a living wage. This is to help support their families. So it's just this beautiful yarn with a beautiful story. And it is also very luxurious and soft. So I was like, I want the softest of soft yarns, like against my ears. And this is a pricier yarn because it is hand spun. And again, the goal is to have a job that pays these women fairly and helps support their families. So it's a spendy yarn. You can absolutely sub in any yarn that's within your budget, but if you do have it in your budget, it's I think a really great yarn and business to support. So again, it's Cashmere People Yarns, and you can get it through Port Fiber here in Portland, Maine. They have an online shop. Anyways, so it is this really delightful, very special yarn that is all snuggled up against your ears. And then I went into one of my favorites, 2-color brioche, because I love it. And I just had it in my head how I love like an ear flap hat. The classic style of when, you know, you have the 2 ear flaps, but you tie them on top of your head. But I didn't actually want to knit ear flaps. I just wanted to pretend like I had. So that is this kind of fun, funky little design element here on the side. And you can see it even goes through like the crown shaping. And I love it as well because it does this juxtaposition of this syncopated brioche, where what is our contrast color in this section becomes our main color in the ear flap. and vice versa on the body of the hat. So it's just a special hat to me. So anyways, I was very sad when this went through the washer and dryer. But I then knit another one out of my hand spun. And I think this was one of my, oh my gosh, you guys. If you've been watching this little podcast for any amount of time, you know that I am the worst about cutting my yarn tails. I will weave in my ends and then I always snip them after blocking. And obviously sometimes I forget. So this has a yarn tail hanging inside of it. But this is one of my earliest hand spun yarns. This is fiber from Spun Right Round in a colorway that she only ever did once. And I would so love for her to repeat it. It is called Gnome something. I can't remember the full name, but it was, I just love all the different colors in there. Anyway, so I have knit another one. I am gonna trim that yarn tail. But I do want one again in those original yarns because it was just so cozy and delightful. So anyways, whew, this is a long-winded little start to today's episode, but I'm really excited. So today's actually Thursday, so I do film these a day or two in advance so that y'all can see them Friday morning or throughout the weekend when you have time. So I am getting ready to cast my hat on right now. So this will be my brim liner. So this is the Cashmere People yarns. And then I, again, am using the other yarn in this hat is Harrisville Nightshades, which is a really fun concept where they basically did this like black wool and then they added in different colors into the black. And so this was a red base one. It's kind of rust, kind of similar to the Traveler that I'm wearing. And this is their blue one, which is called Last Call, which is my favorite colorway from this line. This is what I did my Ginny cardigan in, which I am actually in the process of knitting another one. Because I believe we should knit our knitting patterns multiple times, as you can see. I was just going through my DRK Everyday Cowls and I was like, oh my gosh, there is a whole stack of them. I need to start giving some of them away as gifts. So anyways, this is going to be my combo. I'm very excited. If you know me, you know I really do love blues. I tend to default to blue a lot. And so I'm excited to have a blue version. So I am going to cast that on after this. All right, I am wearing the Traveler hoodie today. We are slowly tiptoeing our way into spring here in Maine, and it's actually pretty delightful. I love a good 60 to low 70 degree day, and that is what it's going to be today. So I'm hoping to actually go for a walk after I've cast on my brim liner to walk and knit my brim liner. So that's my plan for today. But before that, let's jump into some of your questions. Finally, I'm going to take a little sip of water while I get these questions up. Okay. Sorry about the snuffles. I'm curious, how do you organize your whips? Works in progress, if you don't know. Do you keep them in individual project bags? Do you print patterns or notes to keep with them, or keep it all in your project journal? And do you ever get to a point where you have too many whips to keep track? So curious about your systems. So I do keep them in project bags. I have a few favorites that are not near me. I've shown bags throughout the podcast if you kind of go back into some earlier episodes, but depending on their size, sweater, hat, etc., depends on what size project bag they get. But I do keep them in their own little project bags, and generally speaking, I carry around a design journal. So this is my preferred design journal. You can't really, it's not going to focus back there. But there is a lot of these up on that shelf and laying around. But this is what I generally write my designs in. I did share that I'm starting to go digital, which I never, ever, ever, ever thought I would do. But one of my friends turned me on to, hi Rachel and Candace, turned me on to GoodNotes, and I love it. It's really streamlining my design journal, and the thing I love about it is you can search like your own handwriting. Because what happens is I've always carried around these little guys, which are little dot journal grids. Here's my crazy grading sketches when I'm trying to figure out all those numbers. But what I'll do is a lot of times I'll have an idea for a design and I will quickly sketch something. And then this fills up with all my notes of whatever designs I'm working on. And if I haven't gotten to that other idea that maybe I sketched, it just gets lost in the ether. Because once I have filled one of these ups, it goes up on my shelf and I start a new one. And so I do love the fact that I'm staying a little bit more organized. But these were my little babies forever. I actually have like a little back stock of these. There might become my new kitchen journals. I also keep a kitchen journal with our recipes that worked out really well that our family loves. I actually then handwrite them in a little like family recipe book so that when we're meal planning, we can just quickly go to the recipes we know we love. So that's what my leftover design journals may become. And then my iPad's just always with me. So I don't have to keep separate notes in all the bags because it's all consolidated either to handwritten journal or good notes on my iPad. And yeah, that's basically it. I don't usually have more whips than I can keep track of. I tend to be a 2 to 3 whip tops kind of a person. I usually have a sweater going and then an accessory. So either socks, hat, shawl. Sometimes I'll have 3. Sometimes I might have a pair of socks and a shawl and a sweater going. But usually no more than that. So I'm actually trying to think right now how many I have. I have a new sweater on the needles and an old sweater and another sweater. Is that all? Well, and then the hat for this weekend. So right now I guess I have 4. But one is a design that I don't think I love my yarn choice. So I think I might start that over in a different yarn choice. And one is my Ginny cardigan, which I'm knitting another. So yeah, anyways, I just keep them all in their own little bags. I do tend to like to keep like each bag has its own little row counter or things like that, maybe some stitch markers and stuff. So I have what I need in each one. But otherwise, I just kind of have like my main bag that keeps my needles, my notions, my iPad and stuff. And then I just grab whatever project I want to work on right then. All right. Can I please ask you a question regarding knitting with 2 yarns? When you cake them up, do you cake them together or do you use them off of separate cakes? Knitting with 2 yarns will be my next personal challenge and I'm curious to know your opinion on this. So I definitely see, I kind of feel like I need to clean the camera, guys. Okay. I don't know if that helped. All of a sudden I was like, I think there's a smudge on my camera lens. So I do not like to cake 2 different yarns together because I have, and what I find, especially the most common way that I see this done is people will cake up like a skein of regular yarn with a skein of, let's say, mohair or some other lace fuzzy yarn. And they put them together as one cake, they wind them together. And what happens is you don't knit them up at the same rate. So you end up having this long draggy loop of mohair hanging down that eventually gets knotted and turns into a hot mess. So I very much keep my cakes separate. Also because there is a chance you won't use up all that yarn and now you have them caked together, which means you have to use them together unless you want to then unwind and rewind them into their own cakes. So I would rather just keep them separate. That's just what works best for me. But I do know people who love to cake them together. So to each their own. Next question. I have not answered a design question in a long time. So this is a fun one to get. I am a new designer and I want to hear your take on something I've been thinking about a lot lately. Do you prefer to tech edit before or after a test knit? I'm currently testing a pattern that has already been tech edited, and I'm curious what the benefits might be to doing it the other way around, testing before tech editing. Do you have a preference? I can see how tech editing after a test knit might be more cost effective, but I am torn between that and wanting my test knitters to have the best testing experience they can and be able to knit from a clean pattern, so to speak. Curious to hear your thoughts. So I 100% tech edit before a pattern goes into testing, because I believe that it is not a test knitter's job to catch any mistakes in that pattern. Really, to me, the point of test knitting is to give a few knitters early access to that pattern so they can knit it just as they would any pattern they may purchase off the internet. And my goal is to find out, did they enjoy knitting that pattern? Did it feel intuitive and easy to follow? And are they happy with the outcome? They are not there to edit the pattern. So I don't think that would be fair to them. So I definitely tech edit the pattern. It really should be ready to publish, I think, before going to testers. That doesn't mean that testers might find something. I mean, we're all human, the designer and the tech editor. So test editors might come upon something and be like, oh, I think there's a little mistake here. But it's not their job. They're volunteering to do an early knit of that pattern. So yeah, I definitely tech edit and then test. Do patterns include, next question. Do patterns include enough yarn for this, or should extra yarn be purchased? Oops, I must have cut off the first part of that question. They're talking about swatches. Once the swatch is knitted and blocked, could you use that yarn in the project, or will the blocking change the structure of the yarn? Thank you. So this person's basically asking, do patterns include yardage for your swatch? I always bump up the required yardage, which is an estimate, because at the end of the day, even if you use the same exact yarn as I use, you don't knit the same exact way I knit. So there is going to be a difference in how much yarn we each use, especially if you choose to do anything like modify the length anywhere in the pattern. So it is an estimation. So I always bump that up 5 to 10% on the yarn needed for my patterns. And that is to help cover a swatch, but also just how we knit differently, any little things like that that can come up. So yes, the pattern typically would include enough yardage for you to do a swatch. Any patterns of mine that like really tried to eke out every bit of that precious yarn, I mention that in the notes and say, listen, you're going to need every little bit of this yardage, so keep that swatch because you might have to unravel it and use it. So I do try to note that if that is the case. It's only in a handful of my patterns, like maybe only 2. But you can absolutely reuse the yarn from your swatch unless you've cut it. So reasons why you might cut a swatch would be if you are swatching in the round and you do a steeked swatch, or if you do the loops around the back of your in the round swatch that you then cut to get it to lay flat. So once you've cut it, you can't unravel it. But if you haven't done that, then you can absolutely unravel it. To be honest, for a swatch, I don't even reblock that yarn because it's such a small amount. Like, that's not a ton of yarn. And I haven't found it makes a huge difference for me to then use it to knit. But if you want to, you could always throw it onto a nitty knotty, put some little figure 8 ties, and wash that yarn to get it straight again so that it's not kinky in your knitting. 2-ply yarn is best for lace. 3-ply or more is best for cables. Is there a best number of plies for brioche? So I really think we can use whatever we want in brioche. You just have to know what to expect of that yarn. So really where I get like red flags for yarn in brioche is really considering how much is that going to grow. Because with brioche, it's going to grow exponentially more. So that is the one thing I keep in mind is, am I okay with a lot of drape? Am I okay with this really opening up? If I want less than that, then that is going to focus. How do I want to say that? That is going to help me determine and maybe bring down the amount of yarn choices I have for that project. For instance, I'm probably going to stick with, if I want it to be squishy, like traditional ribbing, if I want to have bounce back, then I might choose a woolly or non-superwash yarn that can kind of grip onto itself. If I want it to be drapey like a shawl, then I might go for a superwash wool. So really just depends what you want to achieve with that brioche. The one thing I would consider as far as plies and brioche is this came up during our first Hat Knit Along challenge, where some people found that instead of their brioche going straight up and down in these columns like ribbing, they were slanting. And I think what that was due to was a lot of them were using a single ply yarn. Well, a single ply yarn isn't balanced, because what balances a yarn is you have your plies that are all spun in one direction, but then I should say you have your singles that are all spun in one direction. When you go to ply those yarns, meaning when you go to twist those singles around each other, you do it in the opposite direction. And that helps to undo some of the twist, which will give you a balanced yarn. So one that doesn't coil back on itself. Like this, you can see, is a very nice balanced yarn. If it wasn't, it would twirl up on itself kind of like this. So singles don't have that plying step to twist them the other way to balance them back out. So they're always going to be bias. And so I think that is what was causing a lot of that leaning in some of those Harlow hats, was a single ply yarn. Now, that being said, I love how brioche looks with a single ply yarn, so that wouldn't necessarily make me not use it for brioche. It's just good to know what to expect, and if that's going to bother you, now you know to maybe choose wisely. But otherwise, I don't find, this has 2-ply, this is some 2-ply brioche going on in this hat. Is this 3-ply? Let me try and see how many plies are in this yarn. And this is a 3-ply. I don't know if you can really see that. So then this hat had a 3-ply yarn. So either worked lovely. Dealer's choice, if you will. All right. I think that is it for today. That is all the questions. I'm going to link, it's not too late to jump into the knit along if you want to. Oh, and also just to clarify, we do call it a knit along challenge, and we try our darndest to get it bound off and show it off on Tuesday. You do not, if that just stresses you out, the challenge part is just for fun. So you absolutely don't have to finish it. But if you like to get a little kick in the pants to try and get something on your needles and maybe off of your needles over 4 to 5 days, please come join us. You can, it's not a big deal if you don't finish on time. You're more than welcome. So I threw the links down below if you want to join in on that. You can also join in on Instagram using Old Port Hat Challenge. No, Old Port Hat Knit Along Challenge is the hashtag. That's below too, so that you can find it. But we would love to have you. I find if you've ever been in a knitting slump, I just find that knit-alongs help kind of get me through those knitting slumps, especially because there's so much camaraderie. Everyone cheers each other on. Everyone's super helpful. Again, there are tutorials to help you along the way. So if you are new to brioche, definitely check out my brioche tutorials right here on my YouTube channel. And I highly recommend using lifelines if you're new to brioche and you are joining in on the knit along challenge and you're feeling a little nervous. If you throw a lifeline into your hat, especially before like these shaping rows where things start to happen, now you've put a barrier through the loops of your knitting. So if you make a mistake, one, you can attempt to fix it without fear, because even if you really mess it up, you have a lifeline in. And two, the lifeline means that if you muck it all up and you got to tear back, you would just take your needle out, unravel down to where your lifeline is, and then follow your lifeline with your needle tip to put your needles back in, and then you get to try again. So with very little time lost. So there we go. I think that's it for today. Yep. I hope that you have a lovely weekend. It's actually going to get kind of steamy here. It's going to have some sunshine and some warmer weather. I think I'm going to try drop spindling for the first time, so I will definitely let y'all know how that goes. I realized that I'm going to be traveling overseas for part of Tour de Fleece, and I really want to spin a lot during Tour de Fleece this year. So I was like, okay, either I can attempt to bring my e-spinner, but I was worried about voltage and messing up its motor. So I was like, maybe it's time I learn the old drop spindle. So if you drop spindle and if you have any tips or anything, please throw them below because I would love to read them. Okay, I hope I get to see you back here next week. Maybe I'll see you over in the Knit Along Challenge. And thanks for tuning in. Bye.